committee. So welcome, Amy, to your first meeting. Councillor Matt Finnis is cabinet member for Transport on Surrey, substituting for Colin Kemp. Welcome. And Carly Prieston is the Deputy Director of Regions and Cities and Devolution at the Department of Transport. And if you're here, welcome. And usual stuff, it looks to me, according to my screen, as though you've all got used to Teams now, but if we can keep muted when we're not speaking, that would be quite helpful. The meeting, as Jasmine has just reminded us, is being broadcast to members of the public on YouTube. So thank you for that. We have to pay apologies from Colin Kemp and from John Halsall, the route manager for Network Rail. So we then come to the agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. So you've had the draft minutes. Are there any issues there that anyone wants to raise, or can we approve them as a true record? Take silence as three. Okay, thank you very much. And agenda item 3 is the declarations of interest. If there are anybody that needs to register any new interests or any interests on today's agenda, now's the time. None, right? Well, thank you. If it comes up, then please register as we go through. We've had no statements from the public to report to the board today. So I'll just give a quick update and then we'll get into the main meeting. So when we sent the papers out, you recognise we hadn't heard from DFT about our proposal, and the paper that you have in your board pack reflects that. But since then, you would have seen, hopefully, that I sent round the response that we received. And whilst it was not the positive one we wanted, actually, I think there was an awful lot of positives in there, and we can take a lot from that. I'll get back to the briefing, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And that as a board, we agreed on the 16th of July to put this in, just simply because of the upcoming devolution white paper. Of course, that has since slipped away. So we had 2 letters as well. The letter about the transport strategy, and I thought those of you that joined us on the conference earlier in the week, and those of you who've now read the letter from Baroness Veer, it was very supportive of what we're already doing and the transport strategy. And she was very complimentary about the way it aligns with government's objectives around digital, physical connectivity, carbon reduction and sustainable economic growth, and provides a framework for working in partnership with the Department of Transport, which I again think is what we all want to achieve anyway. But most importantly, she states that DFT officials are now to ensure that they have regard to the strategy when developing new policies. And that again follows on from what the previous Secretary of State had said to us, that they were now treated as part of their processes. And it will also shape the decision of when investment in the South East. So that's helpful. The second letter, as I say, from the Secretary of State related to our proposal, and we knew the timing was going to be challenging for government, and I think the fact that devolution white paper has now been pulled or parked for some time, and I think that our aims and objectives and what we need to achieve the strategy and remain the same. And I think now that, again, we were very pleased with this settlement that the department were able to give us this year, as we continue to deliver on the God, I've forgotten what we call them now, but the 5 pieces of work that we're going to do. I'm sure they will actually add to the case. And so I personally, as chairman, am not that disappointed. But we do have the opportunity to continue to work with the department, and hopefully all of you will see it that way. But I'll stop briefly to see if there are any comments or anyone wants to make on them. SL, I can't see who you are. It's very difficult.
It's Steve Leggett from Southampton.
Steve, thanks, Steve.
So thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a comment on the letter from the Secretary of State. I think it shows real progress for the work done for transport for the South East. It specifically mentions the stronger working relationship with the officials at the DfT, which I think is a really positive to be taken out of this. And it also mentions how we are talking with one voice. And I think the synergies of having 16 local highways authorities talking in one voice will pay dividends in the long run. That's all I wish to say. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. And I can see Ian has got his hand up as well.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, just a brief question, really. Do you see the sort of statutory status issue basically being dependent upon the devolution white paper or devolution proposals? So do you think they're closely linked?
Personally, I think that they are linked, but not totally. I think that the Secretary of State has been very clear that the working relationship that we and other subnational transport boards have at the moment currently fits the thinking of the department and himself. I think that when we and I think that gives us time to now work through the area studies, which is the wording I was looking for earlier, and then get to the point where we end up with our ask of government. And I think until we get to that stage, statutory status is not essential for us. And I think that will be the time for us to push for it. And I think in the next 12 months, that will become clearer about what government want and what we as a subnational transport board want. So I think we can continue to enhance our ask, if that makes sense.
Thanks for that. Cheers.
Thank you. Rupert. Oh, sorry, Michael, then Rupert.
Thank you very much indeed. No, it was just purely to say that I think that the two letters are the best we could have hoped for at this moment in time. And as you have alluded to, the fact that the devolution white paper has been delayed, I think whilst they are not necessarily inextricably linked, they are certainly linked. And moving forward, whatever the outcome of the decision as to whether statutory status is given to any of the other transport bodies, including our own, will only mean that we are served to stand in good stead by the work that has been done to date. So I think either which way we are well placed, and as has been said, it's due to the cooperation that has been demonstrated and been led by you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Rupert, you wanted to comment?
No, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I think the board have set out their ambition really clearly, and what is really crucial for us now is to focus on those area studies, and they will get us to having a strategic investment plan, and in parallel with that, the work on freight logistics and international gateways, clearly vitally important as we come up to the end of the EU transition period. And that of future mobility, I think, is what our focus needs to be. I think the department are really clear on the ambition that you've set out, both in terms of the transport strategy and what was contained in the proposal. And I think, although we're picking this up later on the agenda, Baroness Veer's words at our conference, I hope give you some comfort that the DfT view us in a very positive light. I know we've got Carly from the DfT here today, and it might be that she wants to offer some words.
Thank you for that, Rupert. Carly, if you feel that you've got the opportunity to say something, make use of it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think everything that everyone said so far basically concurs with what I was planning to say anyway, and I appreciate that there obviously is disappointment that at this time, the statutory status proposal was not supported. But I think it's very clear that, and I just want to re-emphasise really that the Secretary of State did say that he recognised the really strong relationship that we have with Transport for the South East, which we want to continue and to enhance. And as Keith mentioned, the response from Baroness Veer on the transport strategy also highlighted this and reiterated that we want to continue to work and deliver our shared aim. So I hope that over the next year or so, as we progress work in central government and as you progress work locally, we can sort of move forward and make this relationship even better.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's no other comments, and I know we will touch on both of those later in the agenda, but I thought it was important to get that conversation out early. So I hope you think that was worthwhile. No other comments, no other hands up. So I'll move on to agenda item 6, which is the lead officer's report paper. And Rupert, would you like to introduce it?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I won't dwell too much on this. It's just the purpose of the paper is just to update you on some activities since we last met. And I think the most sensible thing, particularly given some of our members have to leave, is just to take it as read if you're comfortable with that. And I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Rupert on the lead officer's report? Hands up. No. So members are asked or recommended to note the activities of the Transport Board between July and October. We're happy to do that. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Okay. We've just dealt with basically the update on proposal statutory status. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Rupert, that I haven't covered?
No, Chairman. I mean, you picked up. You mentioned at the beginning that obviously this paper was dispatched prior to the letter from the Secretary of State. I think the point to note is that the Secretary of State or the Minister has said that they will have regard to the transport strategy in developing policy, and I think that is a very strong position to be in. It gives us weight and influence in future direction. So other than that, the recommendations there are to note the submission of the proposals to government, which we've done, and we've had some response back on that. And in terms of the expected timeline for feedback from the DFT, that's in effect been superseded.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll note as printed. So it moves us on to the, I don't say the more interesting, but an interesting part of the fact that I couldn't remember area studies. And Sarah, are you going to take that through, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the area studies programme and also to seek approval on the governance structure for the studies and the sequencing of the 5 studies. The area studies are there to identify where geographically, when in time and under what conditions specific schemes and wider policy initiatives should be implemented in order that we can actually deliver the vision set out in our transport strategy that was published earlier this year. Members will recall that following a competitive tender process, a team led by Steer but also with WSP and Atkins have been engaged to carry out the studies for us. And they have decided to adopt a programme management approach to the delivery of the 5 studies. So this has brought some efficiencies to the programme, allowing some of the overarching strategic issues to be considered at a regional level and then cascading into each of the studies. But also it allows to fully sort of explore the interrelationships between each of the 5 areas and make sure that all the issues are captured and they're not either sort of overlooked nor double counted where there are boundaries between the studies. So in order to facilitate the technical work, it is quite necessary to actually define the boundaries of each study. And a lot of work has gone into that, looking, drawing upon work we did through the transport strategy, looking at the corridors, the major economic hubs and the gateway within our areas, but also looking at how they interact with each other. to see how the transport network functions across the geography. We've carried out a lot of work with our local authorities. They've had input into it, and a series of maps have been produced which show the area studies in differing ways. So those are included as Appendix 1 of the report. The main sort of maps are, first of all, the map with what I like to call a fuzzy outline. That is very deliberate in that it shows there are corridors, which are shown by a hard line. The major economic hubs and gateways are highlighted, but there's a zone of influence around each of those corridors. It's not just literally about the corridor, it's about what affects transport along that corridor. So that's the purpose of the fuzziness, is to try and show that there is no hard defined boundary. It is about things that influence travel along that corridor. However, conversely, for the analysis of data and also the identification of stakeholders for each of the studies, there's a need to show the study in a different area. So there are a further series of maps that have been developed showing the boundaries of the local authority areas and also the constituencies of all the various MPs across the geography as well. So those series of maps are included at Appendix 1, and so the intention there is we do need different maps to show the studies in slightly different areas. Moving on to the area studies government, obviously stakeholder engagement is absolutely a key aspect, not only of everything that TFSE does, but the area studies in particular. And it's very important that with 5 studies running, sometime there will be all 5 running together, that is actually coordinated and a clear governance structure is in place. So we've continued the work done through the transport strategy in identifying stakeholders and placing them in different tiers, looking at their influence and their interest in the work that we've done. And it's important to note here that stakeholders could be in different tiers of stakeholder for different studies, and they may well be in different tiers of stakeholder for the area studies versus the overall interest in transport for the South East. So it is quite nuanced. For each of the studies, there's an area study working group is proposed to be set up, and that will provide technical leadership to the study and is comprised of technical representatives from each of our constituent authorities, local enterprise partnerships, Department for Transport, Highways England, Network Rail, and the protected landscapes. So that really provides sort of technical leadership and focus for the study. That group will report into the senior officer group as part of the Transport for South East structure, which obviously in turn then reports to the Shadow Partnership Board meetings. On the other side of it, recognising that we really do need that wider stakeholder input, we've also set up an area study forum for each of the study areas. This forms the basis from the transport forum that we have for the overall transport for the South East work, but it's very much focused on the geography that's being looked at. Again, this group will meet 3 times during the study and will feed back into the Transport Forum, which again, in turn, feeds back to the Shadow Partnership Board. We've developed some diagrams that hopefully show that in a more graphical way, along with listing out the membership and the role and purposes of each of those groups, and they are included at Appendix 2 to the report. Additionally, we've identified some areas where we do need some bespoke engagement, either via routes that Transport for the South East already have with some of our stakeholders, such as MPs, the private sector, the universities, those kind of things. But also there's the need for some very detailed technical engagement with sort of people like Highways England, Network Rail, our local transport authorities, local enterprise partnerships, protected landscapes, those kinds of people. So those, again, diagrams hopefully showing the sort of little ball with TFSE at the centre and reaching out to other people, show that sort of more bespoke engagement. So that's sort of how the governance and the stakeholder engagement is planned to work. In terms of the area study programme, members will recall that we had from last year's grant settlement enough money to commission one of the area studies, and then with the welcome news of the grant settlement for this year, that provided sufficient funding for a further 2 area studies. But the last 2 area studies will be dependent on a future grant from DFT in coming years. Therefore, it's been necessary to prioritise the order in which we undertake the studies. However, I would say that the outcome, as you referred to earlier, is a strategic investment plan, which will be our ask to government. And that strategic investment plan can't actually be completed until all of the area studies have been carried out. So in some respects, although we do have to prioritise because of the funding, there's not necessarily an advantage to going first or going last. All 5 need to be done in order for us to move on to that strategic investment plan. However, as I said, we have had to prioritise. We've discussed it internally because it also needs to take into account the resources that Transport for the South East have, but also the resources our consultants have, and manage them across that programme of 5 studies alongside the money that's available to carry them out. The proposal before you is that the orbital studies have been prioritised over the radial studies because the orbital movements have been studied less than the radial ones. They also traverse multiple transport authority boundaries, and also they focus on key transport and socio-economic challenges that will be a high priority in a post-COVID context. The outer orbital study serves a larger population and a greater number of transport authorities, so it's been seen as a good candidate for the first study. The South Radial study, when we come to the radial ones, has been prioritised to enable a focus on Gatwick, and also because there's a lot of synergies around the inner orbital study and the Gatwick Diamond as well. And particularly again with the post-COVID recovery, the Gatwick area is key in that. Lastly, it was felt that given Brexit and the uncertainty that still remains around that, there would be a benefit in leaving the South East study to a little later on next financial year, when maybe, hopefully, there will be a bit more certainty around what the post-Brexit landscape is. So within Appendix 3 of the report, there is a proposed programme showing the timescales for undertaking the studies and then linking into the strategic investment plan. But in summary, the outer orbital study has actually got underway, and we actually had the first area study forum meeting yesterday. The inner orbital and the South Radial study are proposed to start in December of this year, and then the southwest and the south. So in conclusion, the recommendations of the report are that the Shadow Partnership Board note the progress on the Area Studies programme and note the geographies for each of the studies as shown in Appendix 1, and then approve the governance structure for the overall programme and each study area as shown in Appendix 2, and approve the sequencing of the 5 studies as shown in Appendix 3. Thank you. I think you're on mute, Councillor Glazier.
My apologies, I will get used to it. Thank you for that. And if people have got questions or comments, hands up, I'll take them in order. Rob, followed by Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thanks to Sarah for presenting it like that. I understand absolutely the prioritising in terms of the funding. I'm looking at the Area Studies programme that you put up, and you mentioned several times about the interrelationship and their interaction, across the geography. If that is the case, we have 5 studies and each have 5 stages. So how do you report back, let's say, on the outer orbital one, when we haven't completed the other ones, if they're so interrelated? I understand the financing, I understand how that works, but let's take the outer orbital, as you said, reporting back on that is in July, and then the inner orbital, South Central, isn't till November, and so on. How do you link that together, reporting back, when the other studies haven't been done? Because clearly that would affect the outcome.
I think the answer to your question is it comes back to defining what each study does. So the orbital study is looking at a different type of movement, along the coast, basically, for the outer orbital study, whereas perhaps the southwest radial is the transport for the southeast area out to the wider UK. So the Solent to the Midlands freight movement, for example, would fall under the southwest study, whereas the movement along the coast would fall under the outer orbital. So the studies are looking at different things, which was why it's important to make sure we don't miss anything through the gaps, or we don't double count anything and look at it twice. But through sort of following the way the geography works and how the corridors work alongside the economic hubs, it's trying to make sure that the studies do different things, but they don't miss or overlap. So there will be different things to report. The whole picture for the whole of transport for the southeast area wouldn't become clear until all 5 have been done, as you said. But there is the possibility of report back on progress with different parts of it as we go along.
Okay, thank you for that. I understand that, Chairman. I still have a bit of a concern how that remains joined up. Absolutely understanding that they're looking at different things, but clearly overall they must consider everything. Every study must consider everything. So I still have a little bit of a concern over that, Chairman.
Well, I think that's noted, and we'll see what we can do to alleviate your concerns. But you know, we hopefully have a successful plan. Steve, followed by Michael.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah, for the detailed report. Southampton City Council, we participated in the outer orbital meeting, which was last month. So we really appreciated that, and we're keen to obviously participate for when the Southwest Orbital Study commences. Now, I see that's number 4 on the list, so that the funding hasn't been announced for that yet. So my first question is, it's due on your timeline to start, I think, in April 21. So when would you anticipate the funding would be announced for that? And the final point, I do agree with what Councillor Humby's just said. I mean, these things are all interconnected, so they will have to be some interconnection. So I just wanted to make that point as well. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the funding, obviously proposing a start date, which is obviously tentative at the moment, but we have assumed within that we'd know about the funding settlement from DFT prior to the end of this financial year. Clearly, if that isn't the case, then the programme will have to adjust accordingly, and that will obviously then have a knock-on effect to the strategic investment plan as well. But we've worked at the moment assuming that we would hear about the funding before we got to the end of this financial year, which would then enable a start. Obviously, the contract is in place to enable a start. It's let as a staged process. We simply give the go-ahead for each study, but all have been awarded at the moment, so we have that flexibility within there. And yeah, I totally take the points about the overlaps of the studies. That has been something we are very, very conscious of, and are trying to manage as best we can. But yeah, very, very conscious that we don't want to say we can't have schemes that double count benefits. We also can't have gaps in the middle where they fall over, and we do need to make sure, hopefully by focusing on the specific movement types, it will make sure that everything's in the right study.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael.
Thank you very much indeed. And I may be going to sorry.
You've disappeared, Michael. Is that just for me, or has everybody lost him?
Everybody's lost him.
Oh dear. Michael, where have you gone? Shall we move on to Martin, and hopefully he'll rejoin us, because he's gone off my screen. Are you back, Michael?
I think he's back.
Michael, you're back.
Hello, sorry, I think I hit the exit rather than the camera. Apologies for that. And you might be surprised by what I'm about to say, but I think the batting order for the sequencing of the 5 studies is absolutely spot on. Speaking from a Kent's perspective, are delighted that the outer orbital A is first and B is now truly end-to-end from the east in Thanet right to Hampshire. And whilst Kent has actually been put at the bottom of the ranking with the Southeast Radial study, great. I think that's absolutely right, because by that stage of the game, you know, any other little consequences of transition and things like that hopefully might have fed into the story as well. And moreover, even from your part of the world in East Sussex, the links betwixt and between Hastings and Ashford, whether they be by road or rail, will have fed into the outer study, irrespective of whether they actually feed into the radial study. So I think it's absolutely spot on, and I concur with the recommendations.
Thank you. Martin, your hands up.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, thank you for presenting that paper. I think there's a lot to commend it, and I really just would welcome a bit more clarity around the approach and the nature of the engagement in respect of the airports. I mean, clearly, the pandemic impacts are felt across the piece, but they're perhaps most obvious, most dramatic in the case of airports and the associated movements. So I just would welcome a bit more clarity about how the study is going to address that short to medium term issue, which clearly going to have going to create some difficulties in assessing the longer term needs. And I just welcome a bit more understanding on that.
Sarah?
Yeah, only the airport's representatives from each of the international gateways within the geography of a particular study are invited to the area study forum meetings. That's our first sort of port of contact, if you like. But then following on from that, the consultant team would very much welcome one-to-one discussions, absolutely, with the airports, and that's their plan is to do that at the appropriate time in the programme. So absolutely, that engagement will happen.
Thanks. I guess it just goes a little wider than the airports themselves, given the economic impacts and some of the specific stakeholders who've got very strategic involvement with that work. Be good to make sure that incorporates, for example, the work of the LEPs around that as well.
Yeah, and so the LEPs are obviously they're invited both to the forum and to the working group. So we have links there, and it's should there be the need for more detailed one-to-one, then that the consultant team is absolutely welcomes that to make sure we do get those things covered.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Rob.
Yeah, it's just to come back on Michael's point. My point wasn't about which one was being done first or last. Absolutely not. It was to make sure they had consideration of each other. I think it's still a great report, and completely support it. But this isn't about which one should be done first or last or whatever. It should be that they all have consideration of each other as they go through that process.
And I think I don't know if you're watching chat as well, Rob. I think Rupert just put an explanation on there, which was really quite helpful. So to have a look at that, and equally, I'm really pleased to see that Carly is saying that DFT are very much hoping to be in a position to tell us what the funding will be much earlier next year. So that's really good stuff. So thank you for that. I can't see any more hands up. Anybody else want to comment? Well, Sarah, thanks very much for that. And I mean, I don't think any one of us should underestimate the complexity and the amount of work that's going to go into these studies. And so, if you've got questions, don't sit back and worry about them. Get onto Sarah or myself or Rupert, and we'll get the answers to you. But as Sarah said, I think having the right people at the table is absolutely essential, and I think that's what the consultants will be doing. So thank you for that. You've got it on your screen there. The 4 recommendations. Are we all happy to approve those and accept the programme studies?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Sarah. Moves us on to agenda item 9, which is the technical programme update. And Rob, are you going to introduce this one, please?
Hi, Mike. I'm good. Sorry, I think we've got somebody speaking on the phone, but thank you, Chair. Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to give you an update on the report on the technical programme. So this is all the other pieces of technical work outside of the area studies which are running concurrently. So I'll just go through each one individually before asking if you've got any questions or comments. So I'll start off with the future mobility strategy. So members will remember that we awarded WSP and STEER, a joint consortium, for work to develop the future mobility strategy back in March, and we provided an update on that in July. We provided information about the core tasks which actually form part of that particular strategy development. There are 4 of those. Core task 1 and core task 2 are now complete. So there's been a slight update since we actually put the report together. They're now beginning to begin work on the future mobility strategy development itself. So the drafting of the strategy is underway. The development of and implementation of the future mobility strategy and the action plan is being overseen by a future mobility steering group. So that forms, it's a sub-part, if you like, of the Transport Forum, with key representatives from local authorities, business, public transport, freight, energy and telecoms, all involved in helping us to develop our future mobility strategy. That group first met back in July. We've subsequently had another meeting in September, where we went through the vision and objectives of the strategy, as well as identifying a long list of future mobility interventions, which will go into a multi-criteria assessment framework and feed through into the area studies in due course. The Transport Strategy Working Group also receives regular progress updates on the future mobility strategy. And at the moment, we're all on track to deliver that by the end of January 2021, all being well. And obviously the outputs from that work will identify those future mobility interventions that can be considered as part of the area studies assessment processes as we go through. So we will provide you, of course, with a further update on the progress of that future mobility strategy at the January 2021 meeting, and I would expect that to be a more substantial update about the actual parts of the strategy itself. Moving on to the freight logistics and gateway strategy, obviously we've now received confirmation of funding for the 2021 financial year, which has enabled us to move forward with the procurement process. The TFSC Secretariat are currently putting together the tender documentation for that procurement. We aim to get that out by the end of this year to potential suppliers to help us to develop that freight logistics and gateway strategy. A core part of that, of course, will also be a freight logistics and gateways forum to help to guide that development, again, utilising expertise from various sectors interested in freight. So we will provide you with an update on that procurement process at the January meeting, where we would expect at that point in time to have have a supplier hopefully on board for that. Members may also remember that we undertook some additional work as part of the transport strategy development with a view to informing the area studies as they come through. So the first one I'll touch on is the carbon emissions assessment work. So we provided you with an update on that in July at the July board meeting. And the aim of that piece of work was very much to enable the potential impact of schemes and interventions identified in the area studies on carbon emissions to be assessed. So that involved updating our CELAM model, so our Southeast Economic and Land Use Model, to work alongside the Emissions Factor Toolkit, which is a DEFRA toolkit to look at carbon emissions, quite a technical piece of work. That's now all been completed. There's further details about the tasks actually within the report, but I won't go through all of those. We've received the report and that's been approved by TFSC. And this has been shared with the Transport Strategy Working Group, and they've been updated on the outputs and recommendations. I think crucially as well to get across to members is that a meeting has also taken place with the Department for Transport on the work we've done on carbon assessment. Obviously, we're waiting for the transport decarbonisation plan, hopefully towards the end of this year. So we're working with the department to make sure that what's coming out of that is also taken into account as part of our area studies. And finally, the final update I want to provide you with is on the COVID-19 work. Members will probably remember that we presented to, STEER came in and presented to you at the board meeting in July. And again, this was to look at identifying the potential impact of COVID-19 on future travel behaviour in the transport for the South East area. And there's a few questions which they were looking at there, and again it's in the report, so I won't run through those in particular. What I will say is we've now received a draft of the final report. TFC is still reviewing that, and that will be shared with Transport Strategy Working Group in due course. And we will provide you with a more substantial update at the January meeting. So to go back to the recommendations for the technical work programme, we'd like the board to note the progress on the development of future mobility strategy, also the progress on the process for securing a consultant to develop the freight logistics and gateway strategy, to note the progress of a carbon emissions assessment work, and also note progress on the COVID-19 impact assessment work. And I'd welcome any comments and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Alex has got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, Rupert, thanks for the report. I thought that was really useful, very clear, and clearly a lot's going on. And I was going to raise two things. One is on section 4, you talk about the carbon emissions assessment work. And I'd really appreciate it if you could send me a copy of that report, because I think TfL, like many agencies on this call, are wrestling with the same issue of trying to accurately assess carbon impacts and helping informing decision making. And then the second point was on section 5 on the COVID impacts on transport. It was an offer really in that we've done quite a lot of work looking at various scenarios about what COVID could mean in terms of long-term demands for transport in London and indeed the wider southeast. And if you would want to have a discussion on that with our technical people, we'd be very happy to set that up, because I think there's a lot of parallels with the work that you were talking about there. That's it for me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, that's helpful. Very happy to share the carbon assessment work with yourself, and the COVID-19 work. Obviously, we're aware of there's a lot of work going on across a lot of different organisations looking at the potential impact on COVID, but we would welcome the opportunity to have a discussion with yourselves. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you send it through to me, I'll get the other meeting set up. Right.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? No. Okay. So again, we have 4 recommendations there. Are we happy to accept them as printed? Take that as a yes. Thank you then, Rob. Very good. Thank you. Rattling through this, well done. We're on to agenda item 10, which is the finance update paper. And Rachel, you're going to introduce, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would just like to spend a few minutes talking board members through the paper as is outlined in front of them. And the first part of that is on the 2020-21 budget. And as board members are aware, we have recently been awarded a 1.225 million grant from DfT, which was incredibly welcomed. And it was actually higher than our planned budget scenarios. As board members agreed at our last board meeting, we were working from a 0 DfT grant scenario. So what we have needed to do is develop new budget proposals, and that has been developed and attached as Appendix 1. So what you can see in Appendix 1 is that there are some conditions attached to the grant, but it does allow for the recruitment of two-year fixed-term posts to support and deliver the technical programme, and that recruitment is underway to bring in a support officer and a strategy manager who will be used to help deliver that technical programme. The revised budget does allow for the expansion of the technical programme. As Sarah's already mentioned, it does enable us to do 2 additional area studies. And as Rob's just mentioned, it does enable us to do a freight strategy, as well as a number of smaller technical studies as well. The revised budget includes the provision for operational costs, communications and engagement activity, and the governance work. So the line in the budget identifies that we were intending to spend some money this year on the proposal to government and our sort of movement towards statutory status. Although we have had the letter from the Secretary of State to say that the time isn't quite right for that at the minute, we do still need to undertake a review of our governance, and that may entail some costs, because we do need to look and see if the current inter-authority agreement is fit for purpose. So we have left that line in the budget for now. It's unlikely that we're going to need the full 40,000 that's allocated to it, but we will start to review that, and we will provide an update back to board members at a future meeting. So board members are asked to agree the updated budget proposals for 2020-2021. The second part of the paper sets out the current budget position or spend to the end of Q2, and it also provides a forecast to the end of March 21. What you can see is that the main spend to date has been on staffing costs and on the technical programme. Technical programme spend to date is just over £210,000, but it is expected to be around £700,000 by the time we get to March. Now that looks considerably lower than the annual technical programme budget, but actually a lot of the work streams that have started this year will continue into next year, and it's really important that we don't see that as underspend. It is committed funding, and that's reflected in Appendix 2 with the line that says that there's £839,000 committed for ongoing work next year. So that includes the area studies, which will roll forward into next year. It includes the freight strategy, which will roll forward into next year as well. So it's really important to note that. The other area that I want to highlight in the forecasts relates to the 2 additional fixed-term staff that we are currently recruiting for. The DFT grant covers those posts, the total cost for those posts for a 2-year period. And it's really important that we remember to ring fence that money in the next sort of 2 years. It's unlikely that those posts will start much before Christmas, so we need to make sure that we've got that money available for the full 2 years. So you'll see a note against the reserves. Our reserves look a lot higher than they have done previously. That's been done in agreement with the East Sussex finance team, who reviewed this paper and agreed it. And they've asked us to include that money in the reserves, but to set aside a ring fence for it. So you'll notice that there is a large sum of money in our reserves, which is ring fenced for the ongoing costs of those 2 posts. So the board are asked to note the current position and the end of year forecasts. The final part of the report relates to a spending round submission that we prepared and submitted to Treasury and the Department for Transport in September. That has been slightly superseded in the last 24 hours, where it's been announced that instead of a 3-year spending review, it is just going to be a 1-year spending review. Our proposal that we put together sets out our approach for the technical programme, so the ongoing development of the area studies and moving forward into the strategic investment plan, and then into the implementation of the sort of technical plan. But it also sets out how we would like to use some of that investment for our operational costs. We believe that our bid, as part of the spending review submission, made a really strong case as to how TFSE has used the grant funding that it's had from DFT to date, the value that has added, and sets out how we want to continue that. Obviously, the announcement yesterday changes things slightly. We feel it's still really important that we continue to work with the Department for Transport, and that we do continue to push for funding certainty and ensure that we are getting early confirmation of our grant. And the message that Carly put up on the chat function earlier was very, very welcome, to say that that is the hope of DFT. So we will continue our discussions with DFT to look towards our grant funding for next year, to ensure that we can deliver the technical programme and the ambitious sort of programme that we have set out in our spending review programme, and we'll continue to work with that. So board members are asked to note the approach around the spending review, and particularly that update, given that it's only going to be a 1-year spending round. And I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. I think there are 2 key points. The first is that just the amount of work that's been commissioned and will be delivered, and as you say, it's no good taking on posts without having the revenue there to support them. So I think that those are 2 very good points. Rupert, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, a couple of points to add on to Rachel's point about spending review. I mean, there's still some uncertainty as what was said yesterday comes out, but it does seem that health, schools, and some others will still have a multi-year funding settlement. There is talk about infrastructure and the government's push on infrastructure investment, and it'd be interesting to hear from Carly what the understanding is from the DFT. I recognise she's probably only had 24 hours to digest the announcement herself, but it'd be quite interesting to hear how the department views that, whether there will be any multi-year spending settlements for the department, or whether they're in for 1 year as well.
Thank you, Rupert. I'm afraid I can't confirm anything at the moment. I don't know what it means for us or the funding, although what I can say is that if we do have a single year funding for our STBs, whilst it will be disappointing that we won't be moving to multi-year funding as we'd hoped at the beginning of the next financial year, we should definitely look at it as a year before the multi-year funding then comes in as part of the next spending review, which I think we can definitely do.
Thank you for that. It was a very good try of Rupert's to just get you to commit millions towards us, and I probably would have done the same myself. But thank you again for first and foremost for recognising that from our perspective, to plan early is the same as any other organisation. trying to pick these things up halfway through a year is much more difficult, and we appreciate the work that you're putting into that. Are there any other questions or comments for Rachel? No? Okay. Well, again, we have 3 recommendations there. Rather than me reading them, they're on your screen. Are we happy to accept those?
Agree.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we move on to comms and stakeholder engagement. Russell and Lucy, I don't know who's going to go first.
Excuse me, I'm gonna pick this one up today, if that's okay. If my voice holds out. Sorry, Rachel's not the only one with a frog in her throat today. Excuse me. Today, just wanted to give a bit of an overview of the comms and engagement activity that's taken place over the last few months, and pick out a couple of the highlights in particular areas of focus for the team. I think, as outlined earlier, it has been an incredibly busy few months since the board last met in July. In that time, we've published our transport strategy, submitted our proposal to government, planned and delivered the bulk of our autumn events programme, and we've put in place, as Sarah's already mentioned, a really comprehensive stakeholder engagement framework to support the delivery of our area studies and thematic studies. All of these individual elements have been delivered as part of an integrated approach to comms and engagement. That's how we work, helping to build awareness, understanding and advocacy for TFSE. And the upshot of this is that we've now got a wider and more engaged set of stakeholders than ever before. I think we've got something like 2,100, 2,200 individuals and organisations on our stakeholder database now. So really positive development. So some highlights. I think that obviously the biggest thing for us since the board last met was, of course, the publication of the transport strategy and the submission which went alongside it, the proposal to government. We ran a targeted and integrated comms engagement programme that ensured that all of our stakeholders in all of our different kind of audience groups received tailored comms around the strategy and submission, along with simple access to all of the relevant documents, including our at-a-glance stakeholder booklet, which hopefully you've all seen and enjoyed. We got some really good media coverage off the back of that as well. That was in no small part due to some good partnership working with comms counterparts in our constitutional authorities and LEPs. The coverage was widespread, it was wholly positive, picked up in all of the region's biggest print and online publications, and many of those, as I mentioned, included supportive comments from relevant local board members. There's a full list in Appendix 1 that sets out all of our media coverage since the board last met on this story and a few others. It also includes a printout of a 5-page spread in Rail magazine, which was published in August. That was off the back of an interview and a chat they had with Rupert. That really sets out our strategy, obviously with a particular focus on rail and sustainable transport, and includes some really good stuff about our partnership with Network Rail in particular. Another part of the strategy proposal work was obviously keeping our political stakeholders, our national political stakeholders briefed. Some of you will have taken part in the briefing sessions along with the chair. We had 24 MPs represented either in person or by members of their office. That's more than 1 in 3 of the MPs in our area. So really positive result and a really good level of engagement there. Obviously, there have been significant developments in terms of both the strategy and the proposal in the last few days, and I'll come on to that at the end about how we're approaching that from a comms and engagement perspective. Next up, just a quick summary of the work we've been doing to support the technical programme with a particular focus on our area studies. Sarah has already given you a bit of a run through, but just worth reiterating that it is incredibly important for us, and I know it is for the board too, that our technical programme, the area studies, the strategic investment plan that we develop are based on the needs and priorities of people and businesses in our region and reflects the broadest possible consensus about where investment should take place. We demonstrated that commitment to stakeholder engagement throughout the development of the transport strategy, and we are building on that in the way that we work through the areas and thematic studies. So we've got the clear and robust governance framework in place, gives genuine opportunities for a whole host of stakeholders from obviously our constitutional authorities and our LEPs all the way down to kind of local community groups, pressure groups, environmental campaigners, transport operators to play their part. Sarah mentioned we had the first meeting of the stakeholder forum yesterday for the outer orbital study. We had something like 40 individuals representing a range of organisations on that call, and it was a genuinely productive session. And I think most heartening from that was the level of positivity about our approach to engagement, and it's seen as something that we take seriously, and it's not just a tick box exercise as it sometimes can be. We've also mapped those stakeholders which don't neatly fit into either a geographic area or who we think would benefit from a more bespoke approach to engagement. It's already been mentioned, we can do some one-to-one engagement where possible, and we're going to take a particularly different approach with our MPs to try and get their input as well. Next up, annual conference. That was last week. Seems like a lifetime ago. It's only a week or so ago. That was split across 2 sessions. The morning session was, I suppose, the more traditional annual conference aimed at our top tier stakeholders. Featured a really positive keynote speech from Baroness Veer, in which she echoed a lot of the points that were set out in her subsequent letter. We also had contributions from Councillor Glazier, from Rupert, and we had a panel of experts from across the public and private sectors. It was hosted by ITV Meridian transport correspondent, or former transport correspondent, Mike Pearce, who I'm sure many of you know. It was a really good session, really well received. We've had some very positive feedback. It was kept deliberately short and sweet. Obviously, we're all well versed in online events and forums now, but we felt that 90 minutes was about right, and I think we were happy with how that went, so we packed an awful lot into that session. In the afternoon, we held a slightly more targeted session aimed at local government officers working in transport and planning, economic development and related roles. And you might recall we've had discussions previously with the board about the need to, the strategy identifies the need to better integrate transport and land use planning. So this was part of our efforts to get the ball rolling on that, with a particular focus on colleagues in districts and borough authorities. We had really good turnout. There were almost 100 people on the taking part in the event. We had the Chief Exec of the Royal Town Planning Institute, Victoria Hills, there. She was fantastic, really banged the drum for the need to better integrate, and again we had some really interesting panel discussions. It was also an opportunity to show off our Project View data mapping tool, which we're hoping will help support that integration and to make sure that decisions that are made in future are really based on robust data. We've also had members of the team taking part in a huge number of online events, seminars, forums, lots of speaking opportunities. The kind of incoming requests for us to take part in these sorts of things are really growing quite steadily, and I think we take that as further evidence of the growing awareness of our work and support for what we're trying to do. So just a quick look ahead. As mentioned, obviously we've had some significant kind of incoming correspondence in the last week, and we need to accurately and adequately communicate that with our stakeholders. With the board's approval, I'm sure we can have a conversation about this shortly. The plan is to send out some comms to our key stakeholders, including MPs. We've got a press release that's ready to go to select media, and an update in our stakeholder newsletter, which is scheduled to go out on Monday, Tuesday next week. We've also got an MP briefing session in the diary for tomorrow. This was a part of our regular engagement programme. It's not something we've put in off the back of the letter from the Secretary of State, but that's another opportunity for us to update our political stakeholders on these issues. More broadly, obviously, we now need to have a look at amending and adapting any existing comms which refers to our proposals to government. I think we're operating on the assumption that it's still a very key part of our messaging that statutory status and the powers that we have sought remain a key to the delivery of our strategy and investment plan. So that's all I wanted to say. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just to also say, those of you that didn't have the pleasure of viewing or being on the conference or the afternoon session, they're both on YouTube. I've checked them out.
Thank you for the plug, Keith. Yeah, so, I'll make sure we circulate the links to those.
That's good. Any other? Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that, Russell. I just wanted to reiterate, I attended the conference last week. It was very professionally done in this virtual world, and if people haven't seen it, I would highly recommend that they do.
Absolutely, thanks. And it was I must give Jasmine she takes the plaudits for the technical setup and making it happen. and she's currently in charge of our YouTube stream as well. So fingers crossed that's going well as well.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Russell? None showing. So again, we note the engagement with comms. Ian, just in time. Ian.
Sorry, just unmuting. Just a quick comment. Had a look at the new website and it looks very good. It looks very accessible, and you know, I think it'll be a good medium for communication between a wide public audience and TFSE. Very nice picture of you on it as well, Keith.
Thank you. Just on that, Ian. So there's some further changes to come that will be rolled out over the next few weeks. Once they're all done and dusted and everything, and the new site is exactly as we want it, I'll make sure that that the board are made aware. So please, when the time's right, do have a bit of an explore.
Thank you for that. No other comments or questions. So as I say, we note the engagement and communications activity has been undertaken and in the past 3 months, and there's plenty more to do. So thank you again, Russell. We move on to agenda item 12, which is the Transport Forum update. Jeff, are you going to introduce this, please?
Yeah, thank you, Keith. Yeah, just to amplify one or two things. So the last meeting of the Transport Forum debated rural transport. This was something that's interesting, that this was an idea that really bubbled up from the members of the forum, because they could see that, or they felt that the transport issues in rural areas was being sort of overlooked at the moment. And what we also thought, to make better use of resources, was that there must be some synergies between the different subnational transport bodies who are all looking at this area and working out how to deal with it. So we had a presentation of somebody from Midlands Connect, and that prompted very good discussion in our breakout groups. And I think it's worth noting that there was just a huge amount of enthusiasm from members of the forum to be involved in the discussion about how we should take it forward. And it's also quite interesting to note that they may be at a different scale, but the problems in rural areas often match the problems in urban areas of the disconnect between land use planning and transport planning, and how the way that things develop in rural areas makes it especially difficult to provide transport by anything other than the private car. So there's a huge issue there. I think obviously there's lots of rural areas within our area. I think this is a subject we will want to return to at some stage, but I think this is really a clear area for where we should have more dialogue between subnational transport bodies, just to try and make sure we're not all trying to reinvent the wheel, but actually learn from each other. Other than that, the forum, as I say, was very lively. A lot of people attended, good involvement, and seemed to be going well. So the recommendations are on people's screens at the moment. Oh, sorry, the other thing I meant to mention was that if people want to see the main issues raised in the discussion about rural mobility at our recent meeting, the headlines of what we talked about is in the appendix to paper 7. We will be making decisions on what will happen at future forum meetings as we develop our thinking a bit more.
Thank you, Jeff. Just on the subnational transport board, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And at the highest level, we've had now 2 meetings of the chairs of the board, and one of those was with Baroness Veer, and one preparing for that. But we have said that we would talk more regularly, and so I mean I'm sure there are other forums to connect the Transport Forum, Jeff. But if there's anything that needs to go through that vehicle, then just let us know, because we can
Thank you very much.
Rupert.
Yeah, just picking up on the point that Jeff's made. I mean, he's absolutely right in terms of duplication, and as you know, now England is covered by 7 STBs. We do work together to ensure that we don't have that duplication, because a lot of these things, it's no good having something bespoke developed in the southeast if you go across the border into, you know, southwestern Gateway and they're doing something different. It's just crazy. And certainly, you know, the feedback from the DFT around things like you know, decarbonisation, smart integrated ticketing, all those sorts of things, they are very keen that we work as a collective to avoid duplication. So absolutely, Jeff's absolutely right.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Again, thank you, Jeff, and it amazes me that, you know, over 50 people turning up, 50 people really interested. Let's keep that going, and thank you again for all that you do. Right, we move on to agenda item 13, which is responses to consultations. Rupert, are you going to introduce this?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Again, I think it's quite a swift item. So there are 5 consultation responses in front of you here. The first one on the DFT's Transport Decarbonisation Plan. I mean, our view is absolutely wholeheartedly support the need for this. And you know, we are pushing the fact that, you know, in moving away from traditional transport planning approach towards what we've set out in our strategy around planning for people and places, you know, that is crucial. In essence, I mean, it's quite a long response, but in essence, we recognise there needs to be a much greater integrated transport system, in which we're pushing that, and it needs to be integrated with spatial planning as well, so that you're effectively reducing the need to travel. Does need an improved public transport offer, and again, we're pushing that. So that people can make those sort of low carbon choices. And although some members around the table would have had a letter around active travel, that still plays a part in that overall sort of, you know, decarbonisation approach. I think, you know, the main message there is that subnational transport bodies can help the department. There's some really, really tricky decisions and policies that are going to have to be made over the next few years. And, you know, the ability of ministers to work with STBs to help embed some of those changes that are going to need to be made is quite crucial. And so we flag the point that, you know, STBs are here to support. And I think the other aspect is it picks up a little bit on the point that Jeff made earlier on. There needs to be a consistent approach to this. And needs to be absolute clarity in the Transport Decarbonisation Plan around roles and responsibilities to actually meet those 2050 targets. Just a minor point, Chairman, as with all of these consultations, there's a lot that goes on during the period between board meetings. So this consultation closed on the 31st of August, and this is coming to you for board endorsement. The second consultation is on unblocking the Croydon bottleneck, and in essence, we are wholeheartedly supporting the improvements that are needed around Croydon to support and improve services on the Brighton Main Line, major artery between the South Coast and London, with Gatwick almost smack bang in the middle of it. So it is, you know, one of the key transport corridors in the southeast. And so, you know, we again strongly support the Network Rail's plans for this. And again, the closing date was on the 20th of September, so they're seeking your endorsement. There are 2 draft transport strategy consultations, one for Western Gateway. So that's the subnational transport body that sort of runs Bristol, Wiltshire, down into that sort of Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole area. And then England's economic heartland, which is Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire, and that chunk around there. Again, both of these closing dates have passed, so we're seeking your member board endorsement to the consultations. I won't go through the detail here today, but the paper is there and sets out how we responded. And then the final one is in relation to Highways England and the Lower Thames Crossing. Again, supportive of the proposals for a Lower Thames Crossing, but acutely mindful that a new Lower Thames Crossing would have implications for the network, for the transport network around it. So we're pleased to see Brendley Corner and the A2 identified in RIS2, and we want to see those pushed into the RIS3 pipeline so they're not left out. And of course, there are implications on Kent County Council's network as well. And again, identifying those improvements and mitigations, if you like, as part of the Lower Thames Crossing is important, but we are supportive of the proposals for it. So it's those 5 consultations, Chairman, that we're seeking your endorsement to.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on the papers before us? No. Okay, so we'll take the recommendation as printed, rather than me read all 5 of them.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm conscious we've got through this quite efficiently so far. I'm now into any other business, which always fills me with real worries. But now is your opportunity. Bring anything forward. Hands up. Who wants to go first? I would normally go around the room, but that's very difficult. Has anyone got any other business? My goodness. Stunned into silence. Well, in that case, with the caveat that, as I said earlier to some, that we will just double check on the dates in future, because I know that this clashes with at least 2 full council meetings that we haven't got that, and hopefully the 21st of January still suits all of us. So with that caveat, if there's nothing more that anyone wants, with an hour and 14 minutes gone, I'll close the meeting.